Good morning, everyone. Hope you are all well and you are doing fine. We have almost come towards the end of the classes. Hmm. मोबाइल नहीं है मेरे पास. So we have almost come towards the end of the classes, scheduled classes, and covered almost everything in the syllabus. So before we talk about malaria today, please let us know. Let me know through WhatsApp or through email if there is any special topic which you might have missed and which might be important from the examination point of view or even from the learning point of view. I'll take that up in the subsequent classes. Otherwise, we have planned that we will begin your revision classes from Monday. Before I start talking about the subject proper, I'm making the announcement here for your syllabus for your second internal examination. First internal you have already given. Now all the remaining portions, since we've covered everything, so whatever did not come in the first internal will come in the second internal. So all your lectures on epidemiology of communicable diseases, non-communicable diseases, national health programs, your health planning and management, primary health care, MCH, geriatrics, family planning, demography, all these things that we did not cover in the first internal will be the portion for the second internal exam. So please go through, start reading it. I'm sure you are reading well. So please start reading it and going through it one more time so that if there are any problems or if there are any concerns in those topics, you can bring them up. You can otherwise also bring up your concerns and queries from the first internal portion during our revision classes. So on Monday you will have two classes one on I believe on basic epidemiology, and the second one will also be on basic epidemiology because that is something that you did long back. So we are starting with the forgotten topics. Please prepare well. Please read the topics well and be ready with the queries that you want to put up. You can post your queries on WhatsApp for the concerned faculty. I hope you have everybody's number. If you don't, please send me a message so that I can share the number with your batch. I will share it with your CR and then you can get it from your CR. So today we talk about the epidemiology of malaria, which is the last, I believe, topic. I don't know if it has been covered earlier. It must have been because you have seen cases of fever in your clinical postings, and we have often kept the differential diagnosis of malaria as one of the most probable causes for fever of unknown origin or fever as such amongst children and among adults. So we will briefly look at what is the epidemiology, what is the disease distribution, what are the various types of malaria which are prevalent, and what is happening overall to the disease over the let's say advent or launch of various control programs in different times. And in the next class, in another class, we will talk about the disease prevention, okay, prevention and control, because there have been some recent updates and advances in malaria treatment. So if you are referring to your old books, you will not find those updates and advances. So let's have a look at the epidemiology. Often you get malaria as a long question, and you also get treatment of malaria or various malarial indices, epidemiological markers as short notes. So pay special attention. This is a public health problem in India, and this is a global health problem, I would say. More than a public health problem in one country, it is a global health problem. This disease, you know, is largely preventable through personal protection and through environmental measures. Till date, we do not have successful vaccine for malaria. So, such an age-old disease and vaccine development has not happened. A potent vaccine for this is not available. So, it all rests on how well you can prevent it. So, let us have a look at what is the disease distribution in the world. So, at present, actually, this presentation dates back to some uh, uh, 5 years or so when I first made it. So then also about 100, more than 100 countries are considered to be affected by this dreadful disease, and more than half of these countries are in the sub-Saharan Africa. So you know that malaria is a tropical disease. Mostly it is said to be now a neglected tropical disease because it is endemic in most of these tropical countries, and people continue to suffer, people continue to get affected with malaria year after the other. And governments, since it is an endemic disease, they have their measures in place, but nothing significant is happening anywhere to let's say eradicate the disease altogether. So population wise, if you look at it, more than 2.4 billion people around the world are at risk every year. And that's why if you look at the worldwide incidence of the disease, there are about 300 to 500 million cases every year. So which is a huge number, which is a huge problem for bed occupancy and workload on the hospitals. So all these fevers, they are due to malaria. Various age groups are affected. All age groups, I would say, are affected by malaria. Pregnant women are affected by malaria. Newborn kids are also affected by malaria and its complications. So uh, with so many people at risk and so many cases happening every year, this is a disease of global importance. And you see, most of the cases are again 80% of these 300 to 500 million cases that I am quoting are from the sub-Saharan Africa, but India is not far behind. So, Southeast Asian countries which lie along the tropical belt also suffer equally from the high burden of the disease. So if you remember it's a tropical disease, you will be able to describe which countries are at most vulnerability from this disease. Now, these are some old data which are available, and the mortality hasn't changed much since these old data. So, I like to put it because it's a very clear graph. So, you see that you compare all these WHO regions: Africa, America, Eastern Mediterranean, Europe, Southeast Asian, and Western Pacific. So, these are the classifications which WHO or World Health Organization uses to classify or cluster the countries which are together in this region. So there is, you see, the mortality is low, very low in America, in Europe, in the Western Pacific region. It is somewhat high in the Eastern Mediterranean region and in the Southeast Asian region, with, because many of the countries in both these WHO regions lie along the tropical belt. So, effect, you can say it's a mixed effect of countries which are not tropical and countries which are dry, where there is no vector or environmental conditions are not suitable, and there are countries where the environmental conditions are very very suitable. So you have somewhere between 0 to 200 per lakh mortality in this area due to malaria, various forms. Of course, we are not talking about the forms here, but when you look at Africa, it is somewhere in the range of 1000 to 1200, which is exceptionally high. You see, it's an outlier disease. Okay, so you just look at the slope of the graph, it is steep going up at the end of the graph, isn't it? So you see, worldwide mortality, the maximum contributor to mortality are the sub-Saharan African countries, and the mortality which is contributed by developed countries or non-tropical countries is negligible. and somewhere in between you have the Southeast Asian and Eastern Mediterranean region, which also suffer from a dry and humid climate all around the year, and vector growth and propagation of the disease is pretty fair in these areas also. So this remains unchanged even in, I would say, in 2017, 16 or 17 data. If you see from the World Health Organization, you will mostly see that this pattern of mortality, though the mortality from the African countries has come a little bit down, and you might see it somewhere to range between 600 and 800, slightly down, but this pattern largely remains unchanged over the years. So if you look at the mortality, morbidity, you have already seen 300 to 500 million people, of which about 1 to 2 million people, almost in the range of 1 to 3 million people, are killed by this disease worldwide every year. And most of these deaths that occur are amongst children who are aged less than 5 years. Now, what causes death in the younger age group? You see that younger age groups are always more vulnerable, they are always more susceptible because they have poor nutrition, they have poor immunity, they have poor fighting capability, and often high grade fevers as a result of malaria cause a thermal dysregulation, and various forms of cerebral malaria affect these children under the age group of 5 years. So, very often when you see that a child is suffering from malaria, the risk of cerebral malaria always looms on the child, and also a lot of thrombolysis causes anemia in these children. So, in all patients, I would say, so cerebral malaria is the main cause of death among children, and anemia is the main cause of death among all age groups. So then you see that there are reports coming from South Asia and in many areas of Africa where they say that urban and peri-urban malaria is increasing, and you know that very well. Even if you look at the condition in India, in most of the urban areas, there is huge mosquito density. Okay, and because of which propagation of the disease has become very easy, and most of the mosquitoes are moving towards the cities because the population density is high, and various breeding grounds are present there, particularly for dengue, for malaria also. Earlier it used to be a rural area, a rural problem, but now it has spread to the urban and peri-urban areas as well. We have giant lakes in the city of Hyderabad. They are all filled to the brim with water. So it presents ample breeding grounds for malaria vectors, as well as artificial collections are also many, so they provide very fertile breeding grounds for dengue mosquitoes, okay, Aedes mosquitoes. So that's why it's a mixed problem rather than an isolated problem of malaria. Now fevers present, and often you find cases of mixed infections amongst the sufferers also. So that's why they say that urban and peri-urban, around the urban areas where you have a lot of townships, where you have a lot of water bodies along the townships, they are on the rise in southern Asia and in many parts of Africa also. So India, rather than being a Southeast Asian country, is now a prominent country in South Asia, and is affected by these changes in epidemiology of malaria. Now, what has caused the explosion in malaria? Now, initially it was a lot of military conflicts and civil unrest, which led to migration of people, or movement of people from one place to another. And when people moved, the mosquito population also moved, and they affected these previously immune population or previously unexposed population to the disease, to the mosquito bites, I would say, and disease traveled from one place to another. But later, after World War II and so many other small conflicts, there have been so many ecological changes, environmental changes. You know, one of the changes, major changes that has happened in the recent years, and everybody is talking about it, is global warming, which reflects the melting of glaciers, changes in the water lines, okay, water levels, though there is water shortage, but the water lines are changing. So these changes reflect in temperature and humidity changes. So areas which had lower temperature and they had less humidity earlier have now higher average temperature around the year, and they are more humid, and then they become new grounds for mosquito breeding. So such ecological changes, and with mosquitoes, they come from one place to another with human movement and traveling, and then they come to breed in those areas which were previously immune, I would say, or all these naive areas where vectors were not there earlier. So if you consider the let's say foothills or Himalayas, now even in the foothills you see a lot of cases of malaria, which used to be very cold round the year earlier, but due to global warming, due to deforestation and so many other changes, even the foothills or the first level low ranges of Himalayas are now affected by vector-borne diseases like mosquito, like your malaria and dengue. Then there are population movements, which you already understand. Populations, they take their genetic built up with them. They take their disease endemicity status with them. So when the carrier or an already affected person or an infected person moves from one place to another, he carries the disease to a new area. Along with that, they can also carry the mosquitoes with them. So mosquitoes earlier they used to travel in flights. Okay, so in the flight, if one or two mosquitoes are able to travel and then they are able to breed in the new area, they are carrying all their characteristics with them to the new area. So they have largely been responsible ecological changes, population movements, okay, changes in vector bionomics or vector, let's say biology, has mostly been responsible for explosion in the cases of malaria in the past few years. Okay, so I won't say past few years because it has remained kind of static in its epidemiology or in its presentation for more than a decade now, and the control measures whatever we are doing are just do not seem to be enough to eliminate the disease or bring it to a proper control level. So all these things, they contribute to new malaria outbreaks and the epidemic prone situation more explosive uh, in nature. So now let us have a look at the picture of malaria in Southeast Asia region of the World Health Organization. Here we have the prominent causal organism Plasmodium vivax and Plasmodium falciparum. So while most of the cases that occur in the Southeast Asian region are due to vivax, but most of the deaths occur due to falciparum. Falciparum is the most dangerous form of the causal organism, and it is associated with uncontrolled, let's say, very high temperature and a lot of complications leading to multiple organ failures in the sufferers. So now, if you look at the distribution of Vivax, falciparum, or malaria in general, so you will see that except Maldives, all countries of Southeast Asia region have indigenous malaria transmission. So that's why I said that disease has come to stay in these areas. These areas have become kind of endemic for malaria. India is also one of the Southeast Asian countries or South Asian countries, and we have a very high burden of malaria. In the Southeast Asian countries taken together, about 1.3 billion people, that is about 85% of the total population of Southeast Asian region, are at risk of malaria. So 30% of these 1.3 billion people who are at risk, they live in areas with moderate to high risk of malaria. And these countries where I say that there is moderate to high risk are India, Myanmar and Thailand. You see, they lie along the tropical belt, and that is why population is high there. Okay, and the density of population is more in these countries, and uh, your environmental factors are also very suitable for transmission of disease. So 30% or more of the at-risk population reside mainly in these three countries. Now, there is also the threat of drug-resistant falciparum malaria, from ranging from monodrug resistance to multi-drug resistance in these countries, and frequently we see that there are cases of failure, or patients do not respond to the conventional malaria therapy, and they often have to be given higher antimalarials or combination therapies to combat the problem of falciparum malaria. There are about 400 million people who are at the risk of acquiring drug resistant malaria. So, look at these huge numbers because of the let's say inadvertent use of uh, falciparum drugs or empirical therapy that we give assuming it is falciparum. It is true in areas where in these three countries, but the WHO guidelines say that you give empirical therapy to anybody who comes with fever. So that again poses so many people at risk of acquiring drug resistant malaria. And the hazards of drug resistance are only that it enhances the morbidity as well as mortality, and it also increases the treatment cost, which the people are unable to bear in these already poor countries. These countries are ranked between poor to moderate income. None of these are high income countries according to the World Bank. So the problem with drug resistance is that we don't have new drugs. Then morbidity is increased, mortality is increased, and treatment cost is also increased, leading or pushing the families towards more poverty. So that is the picture of malaria in Southeast Asian region. You can remember that there is high risk population resides in India. There is drug resistant falciparum malaria, and what are the hazards of drug resistance. Now, in India, if you see, now it has been a very interesting journey. If you look at the history of malaria, it is way back. Even malaria control program is one of the oldest programs in India, though the oldest program, the reputation is with family welfare program. So, and malaria program also started along the same time, because if you look at the health planning and these things, so you remember that in Bhor committee and subsequently in the Mudaliar committee, they gave a malaria worker. So that means the burden of malaria was very high, and a designated worker was appointed in the National Health Program at that point of time around independence. So it is one of the very old programs, and it is one of the very old disease which has continued to bother us at the same intensity ever since we were independent, or even before that. So there has been a decline in the number of cases since 1976 to 1984. Before that, the burden was very high, and this was the period between 1976 and 84 when the modified plan of operation was launched. Earlier, previous to that, we had the malaria control program, and we cannot boast of it. We cannot say that it was a very successful program, because it hardly brought any changes in the morbidity. It did bring changes, but these changes compared to the changes brought about in the modified plan of operation were negligible. You can say they were insignificant changes. So burden continued to be high, and that is why a change in strategic approach was needed, which was implemented through the modified plan of operation, or MPO it is called. So you will find a reference of this in your malaria control program when you read it from the national health programs. But even after the modified plan of operation, where a significant dip in the morbidity and mortality due to malaria was seen, it was almost halved of its earlier existing levels, and since then again there was a stagnation and no great decline was seen after the implementation of modified plan of operation. So for a great many years, uh, till 1997, you can see it remained stagnant from almost 84 for almost a decade and more years. Okay, so then when the disease started becoming stagnant, then it became a matter of concern, and then again it was identified that some strategic change in approach was needed. So again, some new interventions were introduced, and a change in strategy was introduced. And then again in 1997, when the annual malaria incidence was calculated, it was seen that there was a slightly declining trend. But when we came down to 2003, then we see that about 1.65 million cases were reported and 943 deaths were reported. So this was considered to be pretty low for 1 year. But now, if we look at the problem areas where malaria is a problem, so it is not around the country as such. We won't see a lot of malaria in many of the southern states or many of the let's say central states also. So it remains a problem in the northern states, in the northeastern states, largely because of the topography of those states, where they have a lot of vegetation, they have a lot of fresh water, where Anopheles likes to let's say grow and reproduce. Okay, so life cycle of Anopheles, if you have read the vector biology well, you know that Anopheles breeds in fresh water, not stagnant and dirty water. So so the northeastern states, where we have water in plenty, we have high temperatures, we have high humidity, all these conditions are perfect, or mm, very well tolerated by the Anopheles, various breeds of mosquito, and as a result they breed. And so that is why I say topography and climatic conditions in these states, northern and northeastern states, along the basins of the major rivers, you can see is the most vulnerable areas or most vulnerable populations. They lie along the or live in the basins of the large rivers in the country. And India also is a country of rivers, if you can remember. So this contributes to about 8.5 to 11% of the cases in India. And the major endemic areas, if you look at it, are the northeastern states, Andhra Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh, Chhattisgarh, uh, uh, Gujarat, Jharkhand, Maharashtra, Rajasthan, and Odisha. Now, Rajasthan, you would say, just now I said that major rivers cross these areas, but then I say Rajasthan, where there is no major river. There are different reasons for Rajasthan to have malaria, and mostly it came with canals. Okay, so because Rajasthan is a dry state, water was channelized from the large rivers, nearby rivers, into various areas to facilitate irrigation, and that led to fresh water in areas where earlier there was no water, and this led to the change in the climatic conditions, and with water came the mosquitoes, and the disease spread even in the dry state of Rajasthan. So that is the story of how Rajasthan got malaria, even though there was no river bed or river basin in the state. If you now, this is something which you already know, agent, what causes malaria. It is mostly caused by 4 distinct species of Plasmodium, which are Plasmodium vivax. Vivax has the widest geographic distribution across the world and across India also. Second, following it closely is Falciparum malaria. So Vivax, you can say almost 70 to 80% of the malaria is caused due to Vivax. Another 30% is caused by about Falciparum. P. malaria, Plasmodium malariae and ovale, they cause very less malaria, hardly 10 to 15% of the individuals, okay. And in lot of places you see that there is a mixed infection with either ovale malaria and falciparum or vivax and ovale and malaria and something like that. So this is the typical presentation in a small chunk of patients, usually in the younger age groups or in the geriatric age group, also in the extremes of ages you might see patients with mixed infection from both the variants of the vector. Now, prevalent epidemiological types of malaria. This used to come as a question earlier, but then you must know that there are about 5 predominant epidemiological types depending on where they occur. Okay, the first one is tribal malaria. Now, about 44 million population of the tribal areas contribute to about 50% of the falciparum malaria cases in our country. Okay, so the burden of tribal malaria, which is synonymous with any kind of malaria, is very high because tribal population, they live in remote areas, mostly around jungles, mostly around water bodies. So these are the conventional breeding grounds for Aedes, your falciparum mosquito, and then transmission of the disease, not falciparum mosquito, sorry, Anopheles mosquito and transmission of the disease. So you see major burden of falciparum, more than 50% is contributed by tribal malaria alone. And among the tribal areas also, who are the people who are most at risk? Most at risk would be infants, young children, pregnant women. They constitute the high risk group, and this is closely followed by the mobile tribal population because they don't have permanent places to live in. They live in temporary shelters. They do not have adequate protection measures from the mosquitoes. They sleep in the open, they live in the open, so they are very exposed to mosquito bites and high density of mosquito bites leading to diseases amongst them. So most vulnerable group, please remember, are the extreme of ages, infants, children, pregnant women, and followed by the adult population who likes to stay outdoors. Okay, and then what are the additional factors which contribute to the high burden of tribal malaria? These tribal people, they stay in their own niches, so they are very far away from formal healthcare facilities. They have their own indigenous drugs. They don't like to try out the new drugs, and so this limited health infrastructure as well as lack of drugs, it leads to very high morbidity and mortality amongst the sufferers from this variant of malaria. So please remember, tribal malaria is mostly falciparum malaria, causes very high mortality, affects the extremes of ages, and contributing factors are lack of health infrastructure, formal health infrastructure, and lack of drugs. Second variant is the rural malaria, which is moderate to low in its endemicity. Mostly it is caused by the Culicipacies species, Anopheles culicipacies, which is the main vector in transmission of rural malaria. Now, please remember that rural malaria is not is the conventional type of malaria again, and in the lack of proper health infrastructure, and most of the rural areas have large water bodies around them, so fresh water bodies which provide the breeding grounds for Anopheles mosquito. So that's why they are, I am calling it as endemic area, but though it is not very highly endemic, there is a moderate to low endemic. So a low level of transmission continues to occur in these areas, in these villages. Okay, so this has not stopped ever since the beginning. So tribal malaria took the lead over rural malaria a few years back when there was an increase in the tribal population as well. marked tribal areas started getting condensed. They become denser and denser in many parts of the country. So rural malaria, the second variant, has low endemicity caused by Anopheles culicepaceae species, which is the main vector for transmission of rural malaria or malaria in the rural areas, and additional contributing factors for its low transmission or low level of endemicity are that health infrastructure is there, which is moderately developed. And I told you in the beginning that under the Mudaliar committee, a special malaria worker was designated to take care of malaria. So since then, there has been a lot of thrust on control of malaria in the various national health programs, or even in the malaria control program towards control of malaria. So this infrastructure, primary healthcare infrastructure, works very well for the rural areas, and that is why monitoring and surveillance is very good for malaria in these areas, and that is why that low level of endemicity continues to be maintained in rural areas. Then we have urban malaria, which is a major problem now because it contributes to about 80% of the cases, okay, which are covered under the Urban Malaria Control Scheme, UMCS. So earlier, when urban areas were lesser in number, it was predominantly tribal and rural malaria. You know that India was a land of villages. There were about 80% of the villages in 80% of the area was covered by villages, but now that proportion has drastically changed, and we are now almost in the situation of 50-50. Actually, it is 60-40 they say, but we are almost in the situation of 50%. So there has been almost 20 to 30% growth in the urban areas in the past few decades, and with that, because the vector has not changed its original, let's say, environment. So urban areas have encroached into the rural environments, and the density of population has changed in these areas, leading to um, uh, uncontrolled increase in the vector density also. So here now it has become urban malaria, and this is a major problem. They contribute to about 80% of the cases. Then there was something called project malaria. Okay, so this is a very typical example that I was giving for why Rajasthan got malaria. It was as a result of various irrigation projects. So irrigation projects, they bring fresh water which is channelized into dry and arid areas where the vector cannot survive. When water is brought into those areas, suddenly the ecology, the topography of that area changes. Now there is water for breathing, there is humidity, and drop in temperature because of water in those areas. So the Ganga Canal project was the first irrigation project which was taken up in Rajasthan to bring water to the dry and arid areas, and along with that, several other irrigation projects were also built, dams, you can say. So all these lead to accumulation of fresh water. So all these dams have fresh water, your thermal power projects have water, irrigation projects have water, and with that it leads to spread of malaria in those areas where malaria is previously unknown because the vector cannot breed in those areas, and now with the projects they have fresh water for ample breeding. So you see major construction and developmental activities involving fresh water and temporary or topical aggregation of labor. Okay, so when you see these people are also bringing in people, okay, who are unsafe. So construction workers or project workers who stay in temporary shelters, they are not protected against the mosquito bites. So not only the vector density increases, the population or people density also increases around those areas, and the mosquitoes have people to bite now, so they bite and they spread the disease. Now last is the border malaria, and you can say that along the borders or along the northeastern belt and along all the borders, there is high malaria transmission because of two reasons. One, there is a mix of the population in these areas. So there are army personnel who are posted along the borders, and they belong to various regions and ethnicities, and some of them bring the infection with them, and then when they mix with the indigenous population in the border areas, there is a spread of disease. Second thing is because of being the border, the primary healthcare structure is not very strong, so disease surveillance and disease monitoring in these areas is not very strong. Countries have poor administrative control in these areas. A lot of focus is not given on the healthcare of the people in these areas. Whatever army has to offer, it is offered through army and military. So countries as such have poor health infrastructure and poor administrative control of these areas. They are not much bothered about the people in these areas, what is happening to their health, and that is why infectious diseases are largely high and uncontrolled in these areas. Typically, I would say for malaria, a special variant, border malaria, this term was coined to reflect the high burden of disease in the border areas. So you have seen 5 names: tribal malaria, rural malaria, urban malaria, project malaria, and border malaria. So these are the 5 epidemiological variants that have been present in India from time to time. Life cycle, I think I will skip because you already know that there are 2 phases you have read in your microbiology. So please go back to microbiology and then see that there is an exogenous phase in the mosquito. The sexual cycle is called sporogony. The asexual cycle occurs in human, which is called the schizogony. Okay, and then gametocytes are formed, sporozoites are formed. Now, why this life cycle, though I'm skipping it here for the want of time, but this is very, very important. Maybe in the next class, we'll try to talk about the life cycle, because a lot of the control measures or a lot of the drugs that we use in the current malaria control program, or even in the older malaria control program, have a lot to do in which phase uh, we are trying to target the let's say agent. Okay, plasmodium, in which phase are we trying to target the agent? Depends on the life cycle, what is happening to the agent in the mosquito, in the human, and are drugs good enough to target the mosquitoes, not the mosquitoes, the agent plasmodium in its various forms. So maybe we will talk in detail about the life cycle in the next class, and we will talk about all the other let's say these factors, associated epidemiological factors like host, agent, environment, in the next class. So please WhatsApp me. I'm stopping here now. It's already time. So please WhatsApp me if there are any special topics that you want me to cover, or any of the faculty to cover in the coming few days, in the coming few classes. Otherwise, we have a schedule in place for your revision classes starting this Monday. And first we will discuss the epidemiology and biostatistics. Then we will go to your topics. I think non-communicable diseases, that was taught to you a long time back. We will again look at the national health programs briefly, and in the end we will talk about communicable diseases, because that was the most recently covered one. If there are any other topics that you want them to be covered, I think I have included nutritional topics also. So all the diseases of nutritional importance will also be covered shortly, and you will have some hints as to what is important for the exam and what is not so important. So please start reading up these topics: nutrition, your epidemiology, basic epidemiology and biostatistics, and we will continue with some of the pending classes in the remaining classes. Thank you very much. Have a nice day. Please don't forget to send me a message about what are the topics which you have missed, or which we may have missed. I don't see anything that we have missed, but in case you have missed and you have not appeared for class and it is an important topic, we'll be happy to cover it again, because we have some time in hand. Thank you, and have a very nice day.